Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new live stream. This is going to be an interesting one because, as you see, I'm not alone. I have Randy here with me. Hello, Randy.
Hi, Ariel.
It is very early where Randy is. So, thank you, Randy, for joining us super early in the morning. I believe
Yeah,
it's
of
because you're so
course.
enthusiastic about this report we put out, and it's got so much juicy data about games, something we don't talk about nearly as much.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited to talk about this. I think you and I and the rest of the team have spent, literally months at this point, submerged,
Yes.
emerged, whatever merged in in this topic. And yeah, like you said, we had this great report, great immense report that we
hmm
that it eventually grew into. And yeah, and I think some folks out there have seen it, but I'm looking forward to talking with you about it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Randy, for those of you who don't know Randy, Randy has been around the app and game industry for a very long time. And I'm pretty sure you know everything there is to know about games, the history, the past, the future. That's how I see it in my head, at least.
Ooh, the future. That'd be
Of
great.
course, that's what we're here
A
for. We're
little
here for
bit.
future trends about games.
That's right.
And we compiled as a team, but Randy did a lot of the writing and most of the thinking behind this report. And we wanted to go a little bit beyond how much money games are making and which countries are making the most money. So we have some really interesting insights today. And we have never done coverage of an industry report as a live stream, but I thought it would be really fun because we both have thoughts about the industry and about the direction it's going. There's a lot of talk because of what's happening with Epic and with Apple's stay. And we're going to talk about what trends we have seen, what works for games currently, and what we think is going to happen. So, all of this is coming off of our report that we just published. There's going to be a link to it in the description below in case you haven't seen it. Many of you have. But if you haven't seen it, there is a link. It's nice and it's juicy and it looks really in depth at actual monetization. We broke up the top 1,000 games by revenue into genres, and subgenres to really get an understanding of how everything is happening, what's happening, who's making money, and what you should be doing. And I mean, I can save you an hour and just say go make a puzzle game, but you probably don't want to hear that. You actually want to hear what's going on and why. So that's where we're going to get started. But before we get started, normal stuff. I am drinking Earl Grey tea here in New York City. That's kind of summer, kind of winter. I'm still not sure. I think the weather is a little bit confused, but I'm drinking in a new Appfigures mug that we finally got, and it's got our new logo. What's in your cup,
I haven't
Randy?
even seen that. I haven't even seen that. Oh
I know,
shoot.
that's
I forgot
very
my
new.
cup.
Yeah, you were so
But
excited about the report.
I do have more app figures gear that
Yeah,
it's a set of very special, I guess, prototype magnets or fidget toy, something like you
fridge
could use it for
magnets.
anything.
Uh,
Yeah,
we designed
yeah,
them as fridge magnets, but they can be used for really anything. The magnets are like surprisingly strong for what they are.
yeah, yeah. So, but I'll just drink Earl Grey, sorry, vicariously through you.
I think that's a good idea. Let us know what you're drinking, where you're from, what's in your cup. We'll wait for a few moments to get everyone here so we can get started, and then we'll talk about games. We'll talk about a lot of money that's happening in games right now and what that means and what you can do if you are developing games. Let's see. Let's see. Hopefully everyone can see us and hear us. I don't see anything in the chat, and I'm not used to that, so maybe we have some technical difficulties. Do we have any technical difficulties? If you're on this live stream, say something in the chat so we know that it's actually operating. I think I turned it on, and I'm not just talking to myself. It would be funny if
Well,
I
I'm
wasn't.
here. I can hear you.
I've done it before where I did not turn on the live stream and thought I was talking into the camera. And I was talking into the camera, but no one was listening on the other side. And people on the live stream were like, "Hey,
Practice.
where's your video?" So that was
Kind
that
of
was fun.
important.
Yeah, I've done that once or twice. Or 56. This is live stream 56. So at this point, we shouldn't be doing that anymore. But no, we're alive. There are people in the chat. We're good. So tell us what's in your cup. We got
Awesome.
coffee in Oklahoma. I should have put some coffee on this. Maybe a little bit of espresso before the tea. Just so much going on this morning. Tea in the UK. Everyone can hear us too. Okay, we're off to the races.
Yay.
It's
Great.
happening. It's happening. So, Randy, the biggest trend, and this is a trend that I've been talking about for probably a year plus at this point, is downloads are down across the board, games included. Revenue is up, games included. And revenue is up in a significant way, which we will talk about in a little bit. And I think a lot of what we look at is why is this happening? And what is the opportunity here? Because you're thinking revenue is up, but downloads are down. That just means it's going to be a lot more difficult to make that revenue. And that's not false. But at the same time, there is more money to be taken. So we
Yeah.
will look into why. And for that, I'm going to bring in the report so we can start looking at it. And what do I have on my screen? There's always something on my screen. Let's see. My report is covered with a Mac notification because why not? Always a lot of screens. How do I see my screen? In any case, Randy, while I do this, maybe you can tell people a little bit more about how you got into games and how do you know so much about games?
Sure, Ariel, thanks. Yeah, so how I got into games, apart from kind of being a lifelong hobby up until the point that I got to turn that into a profession, I entered kind of the orbit of the industry back in around 1996 when I was one of the launch editors on what is now a network of websites called IGN, which some people or most people I think at this point have heard of. And then after a stint there for a few years, I moved on to the not long forgotten, but the rapidly shrinking world of uh, print magazines, games magazines that
Print.
were in print, if you can imagine that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I worked on a magazine called PSM, which was the unofficial or the 100% independent PlayStation magazine here in the US. Excuse me, for about 10 years. And then, everything was going online. So, yeah, I've had stints in that and actually I'm a lifelong also Apple fanatic. Is that what we call ourselves? And so, for a couple of years, I was one of the editors on another late grade. It's like everywhere I go, everything closes. So I don't. And that's no. It wasn't me, I swear. But yeah, I was one of the editors on the unofficial Apple weblog, which was also known as 2 which was a AOL property, where
AOL.
I got to combine things. I got to combine apps and mobile games, or apps and games, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's what we're here to talk about today. But yeah, I've stayed really connected in the industry in that respect. And yeah, I was one of those people that has just I've been playing iOS games since the days of Field Runners and Cannonball and all of those games you had to pay for. I don't know.
I know, the good old
Sounds
days.
weird, right? The good old days.
Mm-hmm. The games you have to pay for, and yet they made way less money than what they do now.
Sure. It makes sense when you dig into it, but on the face value, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. How a free quote unquote game could make a lot more money than a game that you actually have to pay for up front, right?
And we
But
see this
yeah, that's
all the
kind of
time.
ancient history at this point.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
exactly. Except for Minecraft, which kind of blurs the lines, but it's still not making nearly as much money as it should. And if
Right.
anyone reads our newsletter, they would know my thoughts on Minecraft and that I would love to fix it. But that's for a different time.
That'd
So
be awesome.
we open our reports by saying that the game industry in 2024 was a 65.7 billion dollar industry, 3.8% up. That's kind of substantial at this point.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
I mean,
so
it is even with a single digit and one decimal place
mhm.
when you're talking $65 billion, that's a good amount of change.
Yeah, exactly. So revenue is up according to the next slide or on page 7. If anyone wants to follow along, 3.8% up, but the number of downloads is actually down 6.6%. So getting a download has become so much more challenging. And a download is just someone downloading your app. It's not paying for your app. But getting someone to pay for your app has become a lot easier. How? What do you think is causing the shift?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I guess when you kind of drill down into the core of it, like you said, it's there's so much more competition. Well, there's so much competition.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily say there's even more competition, but there's more competition in one way because of the sort of amount of resources that are going into competing for new users, right?
Yep.
And I've really been thinking about this, while we were working on the report and subsequently that one of the things that we've talked about going on in the non-game space on mobile and mobile apps for a long time has been sort of these clusterings of consumers around a pretty small number of apps in general, and those apps becoming kind of like these legacy products that they're forever apps,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so
Exactly.
this concept of forever games isn't totally new, especially on mobile. But from what we've seen, from what I've seen, from what I've looked into and researched, I feel like if you look in the report and you look at we're going to be talking about something coming up with the years that games were released, I
Mm-hmm.
believe. You can really see that, even in kind of the span of a few years, more and more revenue is coming from these, quote unquote, forever games. And so we're seeing these resources being poured into these games that are sort of, they're a much smaller subset of games in general, but they're generating, most of the revenue,
Mm-hmm.
by and large, and they're also spending the most on user acquisition. And so, you've kind of got these, mega games or whatever we want to dub them
Mm-hmm.
that are sort of at this point they're battling out for users, uh, acquiring those users, uh, keeping those users or keeping those players, we should say,
Yeah.
and everyone else is sort of, like you said, that it's a bad, it's like everything new, even within the same publisher, has to compete against these titles for users.
Yeah.
And I think that's a major factor there. And the revenue, we'll talk about this a little more as well. But that revenue up and the I'm not curious to obviously hear your thoughts on this too, Ariel. But like you've got the downloads down part, and then you've got the revenue up part. And the revenue up part, at the same time, these games are also, the folks behind these games are, working tirelessly around the clock.
Mm-hmm.
I can picture them, burning the midnight oil, so to say, to make these games more lucrative, to
Mm-hmm.
monetize them better. And so, yeah, I think that, there's a lot of other you know reasons that kind of orbit around this with saturation
Yeah.
of markets and things like that. But I think at its core, the biggest shift that I've really seen over the past few years has been to these kind of forever games. It used to be just like Clash of Clans and Candy Crush, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you could, like I said, when we show some more of the report, you can see in these top apps rankings, or top games rankings, you can see that a lot of these games they're not from yesterday.
That's exactly
They've
true.
been a forever game for at least 2 or 3 years, 4 years, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think on the one hand, that sounds pretty discouraging. It means if you didn't release a game 3 years ago and got really successful, now you shouldn't even try. But that's not at all the case.
I don't know.
I think what that means is the competition is just very different at this point. Users are getting used to something, and if you're not building for that sort of longevity, if you're building a very hyper casual at this point, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. And the trend used to be you just produce a lot of games and plaster the apps or Google Play with those games, and eventually something sticks. But one of the things we're seeing, and this is the next slide that I have on the screen, is that the number of new releases has actually gone down in 2024. Overall number of games is still going up, but the number of releases per year is going down. And to me, what that means is that developers, like you said, are actually burning the midnight oil trying to figure out monetization. So it's not just about plastering online the App Store and Google Play with new games. It's really dialing in the how do we make money. And that's why we took the time to actually split it across all the different genres and subgenres to see what's actually working. And also towards the end, we'll talk about how are they monetizing. We looked into every app and we saw how it's making money through in-app purchases, through other mechanisms, and we plotted those too. And there were two that everyone is using. And at this point, if you're not using them, you're going to be in trouble. And I feel like that's one of those things that the bigger games figured out, and some of the smaller games, the medium games, they haven't yet, because they're kind of stuck in the I want to build games like games were built in 2012, where games were fun or casual games were fun, and that's leaving a lot of money on the table. So if you have a game that's not a mega hit yet, stick around. We'll get to that too. So there's a lot of good stuff you brought up that we will be talking about. One of those is the number of 1 million plus dollar new releases by year. And that's on slide 8. And we show that in 2022, there were 686 games that released and made $1 million in the same year. 2023 dropped to 603, and 2024, 399, which is both good and bad news the way I see it. On the one hand, we're saying there's more money in the world of games. On the other, we're saying fewer games are making it. But at the same time, I think what it also means is that the distribution is becoming wider. So the forever games are definitely the forever games, and more forever games are coming. Obviously, it's not a few. But at the same time, we are running into now more games are making money. And I think that's a great opportunity. But they have to do it right. It's only when they do it right that they make more money. So let's skip ahead to one of my favorite stats. This and the next page, page 9 and page 10. The spending per download by consumers in the world has increased 11% in 2024. That's crazy. It's at $1.52, but this is a global figure. So you're counting really all of the countries, not just the US, where people have more disposable income to spend in games. This is global and includes Google Play, where revenue shifts a little bit down. So this is amazing. But then you look at the US. The US is also up 11%, up to almost $6.50 at this point, $6.43. And at $6.43, you can really spend on user acquisition. I think that's a decent chunk of money per download. So downloads are harder to come by, and that's across the app industry, the game industry, really across everything on mobile, but the money is there. And that's really the key to a lot of what this report is. But where is this money? So we also looked at how long did it take apps, or games in this case, to get to $1 million, because that's kind of the opposite of the number of games that have made $1 million. And this is where things are exciting again. In 2022, it took 273 days. 273 days. In 2023, 194 days. So we're already not really at a half, but getting close to that. 2024, 106 days. What do you think is causing this sort of rapid increase in just more money? And we're talking about making the first $1 million. So this is not the forever games we talked about before.
Yeah, I think that again, this is a really interesting point. Obviously, that you brought up, and one of the reasons why we kind of want to include it into this, like you said at the top, like it's more than just games are making more money, they're being downloaded less, and these are the categories that are doing well, etc. And when we looked at metrics like this, I think that the factors at play here are pretty varied, and I'm sure that there are some that just don't immediately spring to mind when folks look at this. But in a couple of cases, I think what you have are situations where, kind of like we've already discussed, these apps are are being fine-tuned. They're being fine-tuned in soft launch. They're really, there's a lot more focus, I think, in the past year or two on really only moving forward with games that have shown that they can come out of the gate with the potential to make well in excess of $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
In their first year, their first month, that sort of thing. So they're kind of getting, tweaked and tuned before launch more. There's a lot more focus, as kind of, silly if you think about it, pre-ordering a game on an app
Mm-hmm.
store. It's literally just, it's actually should be called, auto download the game for me when it comes out.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the companies are really focusing on, how many of these like pre-orders that they have. And when you see some of these numbers, they're staggering,
Mm-hmm.
that out of the gate, you've got, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, what have you, consumers that are ready to, you know, hopefully, if they tune the games properly, spend a good amount of money just in that first month,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or as we're saying, like that first, 3 months or and
Yeah.
change. So I think, there's that factor at play. I think you also have, you have to look at, in these years, how many like really hot, it goes with the pre-orders, like how many like really hotly anticipated games there have been. And so,
Mm-hmm.
you might have a couple years ago, I guess a few years ago at this point, really only been used to maybe a couple of big releases a year. And, it's something that we look to at some extent in this report, but, and we'll look at it more in the future. But, there's really, from our observation, there are more kind of what you call, blockbuster games or really hotly anticipated games that
Mm-hmm.
launched in 2024, compared to previous years. Like when you had Pokemon Go a few years ago, and that was the big thing for that year.
Yeah.
But now you have, this whole slate, and we'll look at the most successful games that were launched in 2024. This whole slate of really highly anticipated games. So I think, it's this mixture of, anticipation, um, refinement before launch, a lot more testing and soft launching, and those sorts of things that are really just like when these games launch, they just like come out of, the launch, they come off the launch pad just, ready to soar.
Yeah.
And again, that gets back to, we'll talk about it more and more, but there's these companies, these publishers that have the resources to do this. But I also want to echo something that you said as we continue, is that this all doesn't mean that there's no opportunity to have it what anyone would consider a successful mobile game, or
Mm-hmm.
to make, what you would call, a really impressive, good amount of revenue from a mobile game. It's just that the ones at the top are really at the top.
And I think what we can learn from them is that you have to be intentional at this point. So many of the people who are probably on this don't know this, but I ran a game studio before starting Appfigures with my brother Oz, who's also the co-founder of Appfigures. And back in the day, this is 20, I don't know, 2008, 2009. We did that before too. If you wanted to make a game, you just make a game. You come up with an idea, especially if you're a more indie studio, and you love that idea and you follow through with that idea, and that's your idea. And maybe it takes off and maybe it doesn't, and that's just how it is. And if it doesn't, you do it again. And I think at this point, you have to know your data, you have to know what works, you have to know what's growing, and you have to know where to market it. So if you're not focusing your game development or your even ideation around data, it's going to be really difficult to make money. And so we have to really focus on what's happening in the industry, and you have to know it really well. Luckily, at this point, 2025, it's data is so much easier to access. We have a lot of data that you can just go through and look at. Some of our stuff is even free. There's so much data out there. More app companies, more game companies are more open about what's working for them, what isn't. So all the learnings, all the wisdom is really out there, but you have to use it. I think that's the key. So let's continue. And
Definitely.
to kind of round up the forever game analogy, on the next slide, number 12, we have the years that produced the most money. And so we looked at the amount of revenue generated in 2024 by the year the game was released. So in 2015, games that were released in 2015 earned $5.4 billion in 2024. So
Yeah.
9 years later, they're still making the second most amount of revenue. Games making made in 2022 made 5.7 billion, which indicates to me that there's definitely been a shift in how companies spend time on optimizing their money making abilities. And from 2018, we have 4.8 billion, number three on our list. So that's kind of not shocking, a little bit crazy, but also means that if you build something good, you can ride it. And I think these are big
Mhm.
numbers, and we're talking about companies that are spending a ton on user acquisition, but at the same time, the same really carries over to other games. Because the idea is that once people get into your game, as long as you retain them well, and that's something you really have to focus on, they will continue to pay you. But the game has to evolve. That's really what it is. And one of the examples that we did not bring up in here, but something that I write about in the newsletter from time to time is Among Us. Among Us got propelled really to the top of the App Store for a long time, at the beginning of COVID, for a variety of reasons, and really had a challenging time retaining that momentum. And so it all dropped. And at this point, the game is still making money. It's making a decent chunk of change, but at the same time, it could have been making so much more had it actually paid attention and followed some of the things we'll be talking about today. So
Yeah.
really focus on your data. If you're a game developer listening to this, whether you're small, medium, or large, that's really what it's all about at this point in 2025. Downloads are so hard to come by. Once you get them, you have to make sure you do the most with them. So, okay, we'll go through a little bit faster because we've looked at the highest earning publishers by country. We've looked at the most downloaded and highest earning games. My favorite, Subway Surfers, is on top. Well done, Subway Surfers. But more interestingly, we looked at consumer spending as well. More interestingly, it's the categories, in my opinion. So if you scroll to slide 18, we talked about the top 1,000 games by category. And it's top 1,000 by the amount they earned, not the number of downloads, because we're focused on making money here. And mid core games are half of the top 1,000, followed by casual, and then casino, and then sports and driving. Sports and driving, I thought would make more. That was just in my head. I was totally surprised by this. But man,
Yeah.
mid core is, on the one hand, makes a lot of sense. It's the games you have to be somewhat invested in, and games you also don't have to be too invested in. So you're somewhere in the middle, and I think that's such a sweet spot on your iPhone or on your mobile device. Followed by casual. I thought casual would make more money. I was kind of raised on
Mhm.
casual. That's what we built when we were a game studio. Um,
Mhm.
what do you make of all of this?
Well, it is surprising that when we got, into the data, and I mean, surprising to an extent. I think we've seen
Yeah, I
this
agree.
movement, this like migration from, the folks that were, majority, quote unquote, majority of players on mobile playing, something like Candy Crush or Toon Blast or, these match three puzzle games. You'd see them playing them everywhere to, where I think there's a lot of factors at play here, but I mean, mid-core, there has, believe it or not, I think been a expansion of the types of players that are used to playing PC, much more in-depth PC and
Hmm.
console games, um, that are making, not a move to mobile, but are incorporating mobile more into, their lives because a lot of these mobile games that are in the mid-core, we'll talk more about the genres and subgenres here in a second, I think,
Yeah.
that are driving this, but and you'll see this, but a lot of these games are either their console quality or they're the kind of games that more hardcore players would be interested in that you also find on game consoles and on PC. But there's also this degree of games that are also being made to cater
Hmm.
to this audience as well, and to try to get them to make kind of like a good example would be Call of Duty,
Hmm.
right? It took years and years to crack the idea of a mobile Call of Duty game. But
Yeah,
now you
very
have
true.
something that, the console and PC players, they'll play on those platforms, and then maybe when they're on a trip or they're out or they're on a break or whatever, they can play, Call of Duty, like a very, you know,
A light version.
high quality. Yeah, you could play like a really legitimate version of Call of Duty or PUBG or what have you,
Hmm.
on your mobile device. And that's all come with, hardware specs increasing, and iPhone's now more powerful than, the Switch, and that sort
Yeah.
of thing. So I think that's definitely a play there. I don't think that casual games, obviously, they're like we said, the second largest
Hmm.
batch in the top 1,000. I mean, they're not going anywhere. It's just there's been a shift. There's
Yeah.
there's been a shift over time, and it's something, we were thought we might see, and now, it is a real thing.
And so I switch to the next slide. On 19, we start to see the actual subgenre breakdown or the genre breakdown.
Hmm.
And RPG is at the top, 30, almost 4%. Puzzles are second. Strategy is third. Realistic sports, 7%. Then shooter, simulation, and it goes down from there. And one of the things that I find interesting is puzzle games have this attraction. And I think puzzle games, just the nature of the game, is retention. You will not play the same puzzle game twice, but you will continue to play a puzzle game that changes. So people will play Sudoku a million times because every time the level is kind of random. And then
Hmm.
RPG kind of falls into what you were just saying. You take that sort of bigger, heavier game, but you still have a way to put it down when you need to. So that I think that explains why the money is there. That the real question is between casual and mid-core. If you're a developer, some developers are not going to go the mid-core route because it's just too big of an investment. And I
Hmm.
think the moral of this story is there's still money in casual. My thing about this, and I love playing casual games, I don't like hyper casual games. I think hyper casual games really rotted it out for everyone else by making it
Hmm.
too difficult to get into mobile games and too meaningless to get into mobile games. And I know some people are not going to like this because obviously hyper casual games made a ton of money for some amount of time over the last few years. But I think the evolution of games is not in the direction of less and more user acquisition and more ad budgets, basically. And that's what we're seeing anyway. But it's really around getting experiences that retain the player, whether it's a puzzle game or a solitaire game or an RPG or really anything on this list. Sports, strategy, shooter, simulation, even slots and casino and arcade. Those are games that have a little bit more um, of that aspect of retention kind of built in, more so than even the endless runners. And I think Subway Surfers is a great outlier in that sense because it just lasted
Hmm.
for so long. It's been around forever. And I have been on the New York City subway watching people play Subway Surfers, which I thought was amazing more than
Not for
once.
real.
No, not for real. Not for. I have seen that for
Okay,
real too, but that's different.
that's a different story. Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about the game here. And the game, I think, for what it is, has managed to do this for so long. It's been on decline now because we do our rankings every month, and it's been number one for pretty much forever. And over the last few months, it started declining, and I think that just shows the shift in what's happening with game demand. The games, newer games, you can't have a forever game forever. It gets too old at some point, and it has to evolve. And that's a good thing because that means that it opens the door to other games, other genres, which is exactly what we're seeing in this report. Okay, let's see. Let's continue. So we actually broke down the genres into subgenres. Do you want to talk about that very quickly?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And you touched on some of, what we had already seen in there to begin
Mm-hmm.
with. And, looking at a lot of it made sense, sort of looking at what's been successful over the past year, especially, or over the past couple of years, where, like you mentioned, we had uh mid-core, and that, gets broken down into, RPGs, first person shooters, and then so on. Or you have, the strategy genre, which, exists within mid-core, where you have, these either these new types of strategy games, like the auto battlers, um like from a few years ago, you have, MOBA games where you've
Mm-hmm.
got, Clash Royale, or, I guess a big example of that has been Brawl Stars, which I think we may have time to touch on later.
We will try.
Um, but but yeah, so within each of these genres, then you have these subgenres, and they each have their own, more or less their own dominant subgenre.
Mm-hmm.
So when you dig down through there, you can see like, oh, like I said, strategy has kind of this they call 4X strategy, is the big player there. RPGs, action RPGs,
Mm-hmm.
MMORPGs, and that is another thing that like really lends itself to this forever game concept, because it's just inherently made for live operations.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like to a category, you look through, or to a genre and a subgenre, you look through, and there will typically be, a dominant subgenre
Mm-hmm.
within there. But that's not to say that there's not, a fair mix
Yeah,
after that.
exactly.
It's not like there's only one type of, or one genre of RPG you could see success with. There's
Yeah.
clearly interest there in a lot of different subgenres of RPGs.
And I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's also where the opportunities are. If you as a developer know that you want to target a puzzle, the puzzle genre, for example, you can look at the breakdown and see either what makes the most money or what makes the least money, and make sure you're somewhere in the middle, depending on your budget, depending on what kind of game you're trying to build. But using that, you can at least calibrate for what's possible, as opposed to just
Hmm.
kind of going at it and hoping for good, because that strategy is terrible. If there's anything that you should be taken away
Right.
from this, is don't just build and hope for good. And I will say that for apps as
Yeah.
well, but for games it's even more important now than it was back in the day, because games, it kind of used to work. Even with apps it used to work many years ago, and with apps it doesn't anymore because there's so much competition. Competition in games is a little bit different, and so you could still do that, but as you can tell from the data, clearly not anymore. Clearly it has to be intentional, and you have to know what you're getting at. So let's breeze through. Let's see what else we have. More subgenres, and if you want any of the details in this, you can download the report, because I want to talk about the map on page 23. We have a few maps we wanted to talk about because that's where some of the opportunities are. Before we get into the map, there's a question in the chat from F5 Games, who's saying that one, maybe not a question, a statement. One interesting change lately has been the ads that promote games as a puzzle game, but the actual gameplay is more mid-core strategy. And that kind of
Yeah.
aligns exactly with what we said. The puzzle games make money, but the mid-core games make more money. So if you can get that sort of a player who will stick around, you're golden, obviously. So yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And again, coming directly off of the data. So you can't ignore the data in 2025. That should have been the title of this video. You can't ignore the data in 2025 if you
Right,
want to make
right.
money in
And you
games.
and you can't look at it just once. You have to, I mean, that's what we did,
Mm-hmm.
but in order to match the trends, you really
Yeah.
do, have to be looking. I mean, it's like so many other things in the promotion of mobile apps and mobile games. You just
Mm-hmm.
have to be looking at this consistently over time.
Yeah.
It's gut checks used to be games used to be made on,
Yeah.
some market research, but also a lot of like, hey, I'm a game designer.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make this game.
Exactly.
I know people will like this game.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we're in the world now where we have all of that data on what works, what doesn't work, and
Exactly.
it's changing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, which means we will probably need to do this in a few months again, just to keep up with changing trends. But we'll see what happens after the summer. I'm very interested to see how this either shifts or just continues to expand. But on this map, we looked at year-over-year growth in consumer spending between 2023 and 2024. And guess what? The US wasn't the biggest at all, by far. We're on page 23, and Brazil is number one, growing almost 50% year over year. Mexico right behind it. Poland right behind 42%. That I did not expect at all. Turkey is up there, and we've seen a lot of interesting stuff coming out of Turkey, and also in Turkey, demand in Turkey in general. Romania is on this list. India is on this list. United Arab Emirates is on this list. Saudi Arabia is there with almost 20% or 18% of growth. Germany and Netherlands. And I think as a game developer, the first inclination you have is let me just go after the US because the US is the biggest market. I see the same thing when people ask me about App Store optimization. They ask which country should I optimize for, and it's usually always the US. And there is money in the US. Most of the money is in the US, as we've shown before.
Sure.
But at the same time, also most of the competition is in the US. And so if you are going
Exactly.
strictly after the US, it's going to be very tough unless your ad budget is pretty big, unless your ability to acquire users, whether through other properties or some other channels that you have access to. And we'll look at what I'm thinking about, some crossovers in a minute. And if you have that, great. But if you don't have that, if you're a smaller shop or if you're just getting into this, going after these markets, the growing markets, is such a cheat code. Just do that and you will grow.
Exactly.
So that is a great chart. The next one on our list is the chart of declining consumer spending, where luckily the US is not on here either. So we're still good. But Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Chile, and New Zealand are at the top. And so if you're spending money in those regions, you might want to scale back. Or if you're thinking about only launching there, you might want to scale back. And that's again going back to you just have to look at the data and you have to see it over time, unless you have infinite money and you have infinite time, which I know some people have, just not everyone.
No.
But what we thought was interesting, and this is the chart on page 25, is the markets with the highest per capita spending. So it's how much people are spending based on money. And Hong Kong is number one at $104. What do you make of this list? I think you made this list. What do you how is this useful to us?
Yeah, well, I think when you look at it in combination with, where there's growth, well, first of all, you can see, okay, where there's year-over-year growth, that's really useful, like you just
Yeah.
put forward, or where there's a year-over-year decline, that's also really useful for planning. But you also, want to know kind of, what audiences are the most lucrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know that, per capita, I mean, it's not exactly dialed in down to the, let's say, per gamer, but it is on a per capita level that, you have, some of these countries or some of these markets, like you say, Hong Kong, still a lot of people live there, but I think it's
Mm-hmm.
over $100,
Mm-hmm.
closing at
$104.
$110 per capita, and it just shows you that the amount of resources, amount of money, I guess you'd say, on the consumer side, that those players are willing to put into games is just that much higher there.
Yeah.
So through the looking at this data in a very, you look at the cross section of all this data, you can really start to get an idea of, here's where spending's, let's say, here's where spending's growing the most, let's say, outside of the cage match that is the US.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of money spent per capita in the US as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to be able to look at, here's where the growth is, here's where the potential is, in terms of the base of players and how committed they are and how much money they're willing to spend.
Yeah.
And eventually through looking at this data, together, you can see, okay, well, here's where maybe your best opportunity is. And that
Mm-hmm.
also goes with bringing in things like the genre, the subgenre.
Yep.
It is all interconnected. I think at this point, it definitely is all interconnected. It's the right type of game for the right market.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't sound like rock, that's not something that's unknown, but there's no more guessing, there's no more, old style, market research. It's just, it's there in the data.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's a question in the chat about how to choose soft launch markets.
Mm.
I think that changed so drastically over the last 5 to 10 years. Um, Very quickly, how would you go about selecting a soft launch market at this point?
Well, I would say, like you said, it really used to be sort of what would work in the US.
Yeah.
That was what we were looking at in terms of soft launch markets. So you saw a lot of Canada. It was kind of like, what do you call, like spend alike, markets. So you'd see
Mm-hmm.
Canada, you'd see Australia, because you could have your title just be in English,
Yep,
right? Or you
exactly.
might see, spending in, I remember the Philippines was,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the patterns there were similar to, what you might see from US players. But now we're starting to see, you know, these soft launch markets be more closely tied to this other data we're seeing about where specific genres will perform the best. And so, if you know that you want to go for a more of a global launch,
Mm-hmm.
you might, be testing in a wider, I would say, like a more geographically diverse
Yeah.
number of markets where, you might test in English in Canada, but you might test in, regional languages in Southeast Asia. I I would say that unless you're, even companies like Tencent, like the biggest publisher
Mm-hmm.
in the world, they're not testing their new games for the global market in China.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
testing them in the global market. So, I think that again, everything, there's no more guesswork, there's no more
Yeah.
gut intuition. It's all really, really driven and really informed and defined by the data.
Yeah. Either guess and who knows, and maybe it'll work, or just follow the data and it will probably work. I think that's a valid point. So we're going to skip ahead to page 27 because this is where stuff starts to get really interesting. We wanted to find several different trends within apps that are not really spoken about often enough, or there isn't enough data about out there. And we have four of those. We have 10 minutes and four of these. So we're going to try and breeze through all of them. And again, you can get all the details if you download the report. It's totally free and it's beautiful. You can download it from the link in the description. And I should stop and say that if you like what we're doing so far, this is something totally different for us. So if you like it, give us a like just so we know. And if you hate it, there's no thumbs down anymore, but you can tell us later that you don't want to see me doing this ever again. But if you do like it, give it a thumbs up so we know when we can do it with future reports we have. We've also released an AI report a few months ago that's still getting downloads today, and it's still very relevant. If you want us to do that, we can talk about that as well. Just let us know in the comments or in the chat. But okay, one of my favorite slides here, and this is using a brand new data set that we have been working on for quite a while and we'll put into the platform in the very near future, along with all those subgenres that you saw before. And if you want access to any of our new data sets, any of the preview data sets that we have here, there is a link in the description, or there will be a link in the description for a form you can fill out to get preview access once we have it ready. If you want that, check out the description. So, okay, I'm looking at slide 27, one of my favorite slides. We looked at the apps, specifically apps, not games, that gamers are playing across the top 10 games in our list. And we wanted to see which apps they're using in addition to playing a game. And then we mapped out the top 15 for each one. And the matrix is kind of interesting. So we looked at Brawl Stars,
Yeah.
Candy Crush, Clash of Clans. The whole list is on the screen. And the matrix is maybe up to like 5 or 6, kind of consistent. They're on Instagram or on Facebook or on TikTok or on YouTube. Now, not all of them follow the same patterns. For example, Brawl Stars, for Brawl Stars, the #1 complimentary app is TikTok, but for Candy Crush, it's Facebook. Brawl Stars is kind of
Mhm.
new. Facebook is not kind of new. I think that should make a lot of sense. Same for League of Legends, is actually YouTube. Interesting.
Mhm.
TikTok is not even, it's number 15 on the list for League of Legends. That's crazy. But then you have Royal Match all the way at the bottom. Instagram is a #1. So now you're thinking, why do I need this? This chart is pretty, but that's it. And that's where your users are. Now, the top 5 are kind of boring, with the exception of a lot of gamers also use Duolingo. I found that surprising. But knowing this, you know where to find them so you can target them, whether it's for engagement, re-engagement, maybe that's where you're leaking users. And so once we get below #5 or #6 and really below 10, it starts getting interesting. So for example, Pinterest is #7 for Brawl Stars. I would not have expected that. So if you are Brawl Stars, if you advertise on Pinterest, you're going to get more users. That did not make any sense to me when I saw it the first time, but that's what the data says. And we're seeing across so many other interesting combinations, especially across Brawl Stars. I think it has one of the most varied selection of apps. There are a whole bunch. Then you can see them on the screen, from communication apps to a workout app in number 11. Um,
Mhm.
but this is what is your take on this? Like, what's interesting to you about this page?
Well, what's interesting, beyond what you said about, outside of that top five being, really these like stalwart, social apps of some, you know, with different varying types of audiences, you get there and you start to see maybe you see patterns after the top five or after
Mm-hmm.
the top 10 of, that kind of makes sense. Like, okay, well, there's a lot more, maybe for Candy Crush, there's more users on some of these more, I don't know, specific social apps or something like Duolingo or something like Pinterest, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that why I was personally really interested and when I pitched doing this, I think in doing this was because we knew we had this data and we thought, hey, like targeting is trickier than ever.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got a game maybe that's like Brawl Stars, or you have
Yeah.
a game that's like Royal Match, you can see like there's a crossover there between, maybe there's a lot more users that play Royal Match on, let's say, Duolingo, than maybe some other apps. So if you're going for that type of audience, you probably want to go where they are,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is the idea of like go where the audience is for these
Exactly.
types of games. And I think that was what was really fascinating. Like, I did not expect for there to be so much variation,
Yeah.
even within like the top 10 apps. But once you look at this matrix, and there's a lot on there, I think we went
Mm-hmm.
through a few iterations of making this actually legible or readable.
Yeah.
But you look at that, and there are patterns,
Yep.
and they some of them make sense and some don't. And the ones that don't make sense, I think, are even more valuable
Oh,
in
absolutely.
a
Those
way.
are the opportunities. And I think you hit the nail on the head. If you have a game that's like Candy Crush and you want to go after the same users, don't do it on TikTok because it's number 4 on the list. If you have a game
Hmm.
that's
Exactly.
like League of Legends, don't do it on TikTok because number 15 on the list. But if you have a game that's
Hmm.
like Royal Match, Instagram is going to be your friend. And those are the kind
Yeah,
of easy mistakes that I think will discourage some game developers because everyone is on TikTok these days, so you have to advertise on TikTok, and then you burn your
sure.
money, but you don't get the right results if you're just taking that same spend or effort, because it could be more organic, and put it into Instagram. You would get those users if that's kind of what your game is. But switching gears, the next slide is also another good one, and that is we looked at crossovers between games and some other experiences, some other property. This was you, Randy. What do we see here on page 28?
All right. Well, this is kind of a bit of a case study because it was, focused on a specific game, in this case, Brawl Stars,
Mm-hmm.
over kind of the last 12-ish months or so,
Mm-hmm.
where, Supercell really decided, as kind of a new phase of marketing for the game to really try to see if they could monetize better, or really drive more revenue and maybe even, user acquisition by launching these limited time crossover events with different intellectual properties. And so you can really see on this, they kind of went with three different groups, right? There
Mm-hmm.
was kind of the more, I don't know, seasoned gamers are probably more into Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
There was also the film and, King Kong and all of that. But they thought, okay, let's partner with the Godzilla folks and let's have Godzilla be in the game. And you have these like crossover items and crossover events and things like that. And it ended up that, look, that during that specific period, we can clearly see that revenue, compared to the previous periods, went up by 86%
Mm-hmm.
for that test, for that IP crossover. And then it really started to kind of, decline a bit, yet they still saw a boost.
Yeah.
But it was with very different types of IP that they crossed over with. There was
Yeah.
SpongeBob, kind of has a,
Yeah. Okay.
I might watch SpongeBob. It has like a broader audience
Mm-hmm.
than most, kind of cartoon properties, but it was also a good fit for the like look and feel of Brawl Stars. And then,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
then kind of, down, and then down, at the bottom, but still, producing results, there was Toy Story,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that was even it was kind of going from, older,
Yeah.
younger, youngest.
I think that's really what
And
it is.
so, yeah, I think though that, overall what this really shows and why we wanted to look at it is that there's a reason why these IP crossovers are happening,
Mm-hmm.
and that you can actually, with data, you can get an understanding of what works, so that you can think
Mm-hmm.
about, well, what might work for my game,
Exactly. And this is again,
uh,
this applies at
yeah.
many levels. You don't have to be humongous in order to have an IP crossover. It may not be as big as Godzilla or SpongeBob or anything like
Hmm.
that, but you can still have that same aspect. And I think we'll be seeing more of that in the future, just like we're seeing more live ops now as a way to get that retention. Because again, the downloads are hard. And so when you get a download, you really have to work hard on turning that into money. And in the case of games, even more money because games don't do subscriptions quite as much. And I think on that note, we should continue and look at the next chart. Whoa, what happened? Okay, there we go. Which is the way that games monetize. So we took the top games and we actually put them all on a chart of how they monetize. What are all the different ways in which they make money? And two kind of made the top, and that is consumable in-app purchases and also limited time events. So every single game had some sort of a limited time event or some sort of an in-app currency, which makes a lot of sense. I think in-app currency has been the way to go for pretty much ever. Even before in-app purchases, there was in-app currency, and it was kind of awful, and you had to download a different app just for the currency. Those of you who've been around long enough will know what I'm talking about. If you want to buy a vial of stars, you had to download a whole other app, and it would just add stars to your account. Back in the good old days, but that still works. Premium currency via IP, in-app purchases for bundles and packages. Now, unlocking cosmetics. That's or basically looks. Um, that's number what 5 on our list? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How do you feel about that as a growing mechanic? It's at 60-70% on our list. Is that something that people should see more of? That's just a thought that I had because I keep seeing it in more and more games.
Yeah, and I think the reason, we kind of are seeing more and more of that is, again, going back to the types of games that are popular,
Mm-hmm.
right? Scanning, personalization, character scans. I mean, it's back in the App Store.
Mm-hmm.
Fortnite is that's the model, right? Is selling
Yeah, that's
character
very true.
skins. They're no different play wise, but they look different and they're popular. And I think that, there's a few different levels here happening. There's players wanting to customize the game. There's players wanting to, play as their favorite character,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing. But I think by and large, one of the reasons why we're seeing that become so popular is that we're seeing more and more of these console PC style games
Mm-hmm.
succeeding on mobile, and they're bringing with them that monetization model of, they don't not have microtransactions,
Yep.
but, for coin, like premium currencies, that sort of thing, like you just mentioned, but they do have transactions for skins and personalization
Mm-hmm.
items. So, I think that they're bringing that over and they're continuing to use that as a revenue generating mechanism, but then that's also having kind of like this knock-on effect to other mobile games
Yep.
where, they might not have thought about,
When you follow the
customization
data,
items.
that's what happens.
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting way of going about it because the usually the amount of effort that goes into skins is less than some other things like brand new levels or expanded gameplay. What
Sure.
you would do with live ops even to retain, and this both generates revenue and also retains because as you build your wardrobe in this case, you're more
Exactly.
inclined to play the game, and if it's a character that you like, going back to the crossovers we looked at before, now you have more incentive to just go back into the game and play it. And this, on
Yeah.
the other hand, just delivers more money. So it's kind of a win-win. To me, this is a cheat code. And if you don't implement this in your game in 2025, I think you're leaving money on the table. And most games can actually benefit from this, with very few exceptions that I can barely think of right now. And that's a trend
Right,
that
right.
we're just seeing. I don't know if now, but now-ish. So I think that's definitely something we will see more of, as we continue to do this. So that's probably the last trend we had time for, but we have one more trend, and I do want to talk about it. So we'll touch on it very, very quickly, and then we'll take questions, and then we'll go away. But we also looked at the ad networks that games are using, because we have SDK intelligence, and that tells us what's installed in these games. And one of the trends that we've seen is that many of them used to be fairly even for a long time. We looked at Unity ads, we looked at Facebook ads, AdMob, Iron Source, and AppLovin. But AppLovin seems to be the winner in 2024, and there's been a lot of chatter about AppLovin in general, what they've done. What do you think is driving this?
So, in terms of these ad networks that are, either, declining in popularity, or I guess in the percentage of games that they're installed across,
Hmm.
and those that are growing, is, one of the things I think we see is AppLovin really jumping up, where you might see a slight decline in something like Unity. And
Hmm.
there's kind of external factors at play here. There was the developers, had some issues with maybe with what Unity was doing for a time.
True.
And so you might have seen some amount of churn there. But then, with something like AppLovin, you might see that, they are working on different ways to really like kind of serve ads in like different places. I mean, Apple is developing its own games. So even going from being something like a kind of like a unidirectional approach, where you use this SDK, and it's really only show it's you can show ads from that network. You can also, though, with the AppLovin situation, you could be advertising your game, on the flip side of that,
That's very true.
on a lot of different games. And AppLovin has, I think over the past 12 months or so, like you said, we've seen so much movement with them. They've just been doing a lot more to really optimize their offering
Yeah.
for gamers, and or for game makers. And it's, again, you just have to be able to see where those innovations are being made, or where there's, where you want to follow, right?
Yeah.
You want to follow where the big players are going.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we could really see here in this data.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think AppLovin specifically has been an interesting one, mostly because most of the other ad networks have been pretty much the same. Either they work or they don't. Unity is a Unity. You have Unity, the engine, you have Unity, the ad network, and they kind of work together.
Yeah.
And Unity is big. Not to say that AppLovin is bigger than any of them, but just seeing all the interest in AppLovin, and also all the negativity that has come out around their AI attribution and some of the other stuff they've been doing, and what's happening with the game studios they owned. But at the same time, I think ultimately, if your game is still monetizing with ads in 2025, and we're seeing a slight shift away from that, and that's why I think the decline or the stagnation in growth is
Yeah.
something that we're seeing. But if you're still doing that, there are still solutions that want to generate more revenue for you. And if you're an advertiser, which I think is really the user acquisition side, that's really the key here. You can't just go off of what just the big names at this point, mostly because you're not going to get enough or as many eyeballs, or the eyeballs are going to be more expensive. So following this
Mm.
trend has been actually pretty interesting to see AppLovin kind of climbing out and trying to claw its way up to the top against companies like Iron Source that are pretty big. AdMob, well, that's just AdMob. Even
Yeah.
Facebook. Facebook had kind of a rough time because of app tracking transparency, but that seems to slowly being shifted towards moving back to normal, even though hyper casual games are not exactly coming back. We're seeing more of them, but they're not exactly coming back. And now there's a lot of talk of hybrid casual, which merges everything together. I guess brings the mid core a little bit down, strategy a little bit down. Those are topics for our next live stream where
Yeah.
we'll talk about more games. We'll have to revisit this. I have a sneaking suspicion that after the summer, either some of these will change a little bit, or some of these will be reinforced, but only some. Not all of these trends are going to continue. So we're only 10 minutes over time. We started a little bit late, so I think it's fine. Randy, do you have any final thoughts for all the game developers in the audience? How do they make more money in 2025?
Follow the data.
Follow the data.
I mean,
That's exactly what
it,
I was going to say.
I mean, it doesn't, it's maybe nothing new to say follow the data, but I really think that what we wanted to show with this report was that there's a lot more than just what the popular categories are, what the popular types of games are. You have to look at it holistically at kind of every stage. Where are my potential players?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of games are they playing? Where are they playing them? How are they finding out about them?
Yep.
What other types of where can I reach them? You really have to be using data kind of up and down or across.
Mm-hmm.
Spectrums go across, right? Yeah, you have
All
to
the
be
way.
using data around the rainbow of data. You
Yep.
really need to be looking at all of these things, and you don't have to be, a multi-billion dollar publisher. I think
Exactly. I think that's the
even
key.
even the smallest publisher, even a publisher working on its first game or developer, even
Mm-hmm.
a small developer could look at this kind of data and really create a very successful strategy
Mm-hmm.
that will make them not such a small developer anymore.
Exactly. And the money is there. I think that's the key. So even though downloads are down kind of across the board, there's still downloads. And the downloads are
Yes.
in the many, many billions, enough for new entrants to come in and claw a little bit. And we look at all the big games and the really big budgets, but those still leave a lot of room for the smaller games to exist. And I think that's where the opportunities are. So the opportunities we outlined, the genres we looked at, the subgenres we looked at, the way to monetize, even the ad networks, you take all those and you put them into a good plan that is
Mhm.
fueled by where to go, still has an amazing chance for a game to succeed in 2025. That's my take. Let's see if we have any questions in the chat before we say goodbye. There's one question that says, do you think party games still have opportunity in 2025? What do you think, Randy?
Do we
Party
still
games.
part party game? So, I mean, that kind of covers a pretty wide, kind of spread of game. I think party games, um, that probably, those will fall into casual. They might fall into puzzle in some aspect, but
Mm-hmm.
there is a actual, I think we included like a party subgenre in the taxonomy we used. And so you could kind of see from that, like, okay, well, within the top 1,000, kind of where that was at. And yeah, there's still an opportunity there. It's not maybe as large as, say, match three puzzle games or merge games or something like that,
Yeah.
but there really is. And I think what you could also take away from this as well is you don't have to say, like, okay, I want to make just a match three puzzle. I'm going to make the next Bejeweled. I'm going to make
Yeah.
the next Candy Crush. You could say, I'm going to make a party game that's multiplayer that uses aspects of maybe match three
Mm-hmm.
puzzle games or what have you. It could have all different types of puzzle games in it
Yep.
that are played by different, like you and I and the rest of the team could all be playing
Mm-hmm.
this at the same time. And then you mix in live operations. So, you're not running out of content.
Yep.
You're
I
always
think that's the
optimizing
key.
the content. And there you go. I mean, this is not meant to be, you can only be in this silo.
Yep.
It's meant to be, take all of this into consideration,
Yeah.
and find who's doing what you're considering doing, or find puzzle games. Use, like, on the platform with
Mm-hmm.
Explorer, find puzzle games or party games in this case
Yep.
that are doing really well, and look at look at how they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I definitely think that especially with live operations, especially with
Mm-hmm.
multiplayer, real-time multiplayer, that there is still a place for those. There's still a place for party games, and gimmick party games like Heads Up. I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know if that time has come and gone, but party games definitely
Yeah.
still there's still interest as the data proves out.
Absolutely. I think there was a little bit of a shift because COVID made us all go into party games because no one could see
Yeah.
anyone for a long time. But now the shift is back to party games played together, kind of like Jackbox. We love Jackbox in the
Yeah.
office, and I've seen that across more and more and more people. So maybe you have to shift your strategy a little bit from games that are played completely in a silo but together to together. But they
Mhm.
still exist, and it's still an opportunity. Maybe we can do a deep dive into that on the newsletter. If you're not subscribed to the newsletter, this is a good reminder. Subscribe to the newsletter where I publish 5 insights with more games over the last few months every week. So a link to that below. I think we definitely ran out of time by now, so it's time to say goodbye. Randy, thank you for joining me and doing this.
Of
This was fun.
course.
Hopefully, all the viewers enjoy this, and if there were enough likes, we might even do this again. If you haven't given the video a like, now is a good time to remind us that you want us to do this again. Otherwise, we're going to sign off, and we're going to be back, or at least I'm going to be back, to talk more about App Store optimization and probably custom product pages. I'm cooking something new. It's going to be very interesting to optimize your Apple ad campaigns and make you more money. So stay tuned. That's coming soon. That's pretty much it for me. Again, thank you, Randy. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll be back later.